Welcome to the Caffeine Stream on Caffeine and Philosophy.
Alright, hello everyone and welcome to the Caffeine Stream. My name is C.B. Robertson. This is episode 30 and today we're diving into a very controversial and important political subject. We will be talking about abortion, that's right. The inspiration for getting into this was a recent tweet by James Lindsay, who I've been following with great interest over the last year, I would say. Very good thinker to follow if you're interested in learning about, socio-emotional learning, Marxism, Hegelianism, critical race theory, that sort of thing. I would go so far as to say you probably don't understand those things very well if you don't follow him, unless you have done a ton of independent research on those. So, anyways, that aside, James Lindsay recently tweeted something about how the issue of abortion is like catnips for conservatives. The subject can always bait conservatives into losing in a political context because they will always die on that hill, even though it's actually not that popular with most Americans. The reality is most Americans abhor abortion, but they still think it should be legal, at least in some circumstances. So the absolute ride or die, absolute no on abortion often wins, causes wins for the left, and we might have seen that actually in this most recent legislative election, which was supposed to be a right-wing landslide, because that's usually what happens when the president is a Democrat. You get the other side to swing back, and likewise when you have a Republican president, the left sweeps the House and the Senate. But that didn't really happen the same way. And there was some speculation that the overturning of Roe versus Wade had something to do with that, and a lot of the fear mongering around, Republicans are going to ban it and so forth. Now, this is not a podcast about political utility. It's a podcast about philosophy, and I'd like to keep it that way. However, political events can be instigations for bringing up a subject that I've held for a while. And what I'm about to express here has been my position for some years now, although it's developed and been refined in the time being. But I think it's a good time to bring this subject up, and that is that there is in normal political parlance in the United States, being pro-choice, which is, pro-abortion, is a left-wing position, and being pro-life, so anti-abortion, is the right-wing position. There isn't really an exception to that. I think there is a case, a very strong case, from the right for abortion, or at least for the right to abortion. So before we get into that, we have to, just some basic philosophical housekeeping. What do we mean by political right and left? I've explained this before in previous podcasts, but I'll go over it again here. All parties of the political right are parties that believe in the myth of the Golden Age. And here by myth, I don't mean falsehood, I mean sacred story. So the myth of the Golden Age is the idea that the best times of humanity are in the past, possibly the distant past, and that the best we can do is to try to go back, to return to the good times of the past. If not completely, then at least partially. Bring back some of those positive elements, and that will give us a pretty good life. The political left is defined by the myth of progress. Again, here, Myth doesn't mean falsehood, it means sacred story. And the myth of progress is the idea that humanity is continuing to improve and will continue to improve. That progress and improvement in technology and understanding and virtue and, self-actualization is inevitable. And that doesn't mean we won't have setbacks. It doesn't mean we won't make mistakes. It just means that, with every mistake that we make, we've learned something new that doesn't work, so next time we can get it a little closer to right. And that path of progress is inevitable, and we will eventually triumph in achieving greater degrees of all these good things. And so it's a very optimistic view, whereas the political right is essentially pessimistic. Now, of course, the thing about the myth of progress is that it sort of requires the rejection of the past. It has to look on the past as benighted and ignorant and barbaric and so forth. So there's a lot of rejection of old traditions and old customs that comes with the myth of progress, just as there's an inherent skepticism of all new innovation that comes from the political right. Now, I find myself in a weird position here because I am personally closer to a subscriber to the myth of recurrence, which is that we're facing the same damn problems we've been facing for, 4, 5, 6,000 years. New versions of them. Technology changes the substance slightly, but the essence of the problems we're facing are still the same. The nature of our relationships are still the same. We are not progressing in that sense, at a deep spiritual level, but we're also not like worse off than our far superior ancestors, as many on the right seem to believe. So I am personally at a deep level neither of the left nor of the right, but in these days I find myself far more strongly connected with today's right than with the left. The right is wrong, but I believe the left is both wrong and also evil, at least in its current iteration. So, we'll maybe I will discover that I'm really a rightist later on in my life. But for the moment, I don't believe I am. So, the argument I'm going to be making here, I think, is an actually right-wing case for abortion. Now, to make that argument, we have to maybe delve into why is it that pro-life is inherently right-wing today and pro-choice is inherently left. I don't think they are intrinsically. I think they are the way they are now because they've become tied to institutions. On the right, this means Christianity. Within Christian theology, the unborn are innocent humans with souls. There's this famous passage in the Psalms where King David says, you knew me before I was born, you saw me knit together in my mother's womb. So King David is recalling his own period in the womb. And so it implies a kind of personhood there. But also, these are soul, individuals with souls. And this used to be a great question of Catholic theology. Like, at what stage of pregnancy does the soul enter the body? Is it at the point of conception? Is it at the quickening? Is it at birth? Is it at some other stage? I think official doctrine is actually the quickening now. I could be wrong on that, though. Which is why Catholics are so hardcore against abortion, even though they tend to be rather left-wing as a group today. Not always historically, but and there's also, of course, the famous passage where Jesus says, those who harm children would be better off having a millstone tied to their neck and thrown into the ocean. There's a deep Christian aversion to harming the innocent, and also an enjoyment to protect the innocent. And this is an absolute moral injunction. Winning political points is secondary. Like, you would use political power to do this. The idea that, oh, we can't do this because then we might lose political power is a total non-starter to Christians, because there's no higher end for a Christian than using political power to protect the innocent life. Well, you might say there's more. We could get into that, but that's sort of the conventional Christian cultural view, which is admirable in some ways. So anyways, that's the right-wing side. The right being attached to the Golden Age. Christianity is the religion of the past, so the right attaches itself to Christianity and Christian views of innocence and life and the soul and so forth. So what's the institution for the left? I believe for the left it's civil rights, which are critically not to be confused with natural rights. They're very different things. This is, of course, derivative from the idea of bodily autonomy and the civil rights of ownership over our own bodies, which is pretty reasonable. The right-wing counter-argument is, well, that's not your body in there. That's someone else's body. And to which the woman, the leftist woman, or the male who's speaking on behalf of these leftist women, says, yes, but it is her body that is sustaining that, and she has absolute sovereignty and control and autonomy over that. So you could think of it as a town that is upstream from another town, and the town downstream maybe requires the water for certain things, but the town upstream maintains its sovereignty over the river at its stage, and if it chooses to dam it, the town downstream will just have to deal with that. They don't have the right to say you can't dam the river. And the civil rights argument is sort of along those lines. Cynically, and I'm inclined in that direction, it's very tempting to think, who is a person to be protected in this way is defined kind of in terms of who can give you political power by means of votes, because women can vote and the unborn don't. Obviously, this implies that in most cases, the unborn child could be given birth to and protected without the woman ever having to really raise it or anything. There are orphanages and other things like that. But anyways, I just wanted to give a basic outline of the institutional attachments that lead the right and the left to where they are today. Because again, there are strong arguments. I mean, many of the eugenics movements of the 19th and 20th century were overtly left-wing. It was very progressive. We're going to design a kind of new man. We're going to create a new kind of person, a better kind of person, by controlling breeding, and that involves abortion in many cases. Everyone, I think it's common knowledge now that the whole Margaret Sanger connection between Planned Parenthood and eugenics and so forth. So, but the right, of course, is not averse to eugenics historically. You look at Sparta, and the left is certainly open to, at least in principle, the civil rights of the unborn, because they like to defend the marginalized and so forth, and who is more marginalized than those who literally have no voice. So I think it just happens to be this way at the moment because of the institutions the right and the left currently embrace. So, all that being laid out, what is the right-wing case for abortion? I think, in a word, it is sovereignty. And this is based on the family, the institution of the family, and our past, our tradition and historical attachment to the family. And this is with both the for abortion argument that I will be making and the against argument. The Christian culture in the United States is very attached to the family. I have my questions about that theologically, But the fact is that they are very attached to the family. And we can think of it as a quantity versus quality question. Is it better to have more people in your family or to increase the quality of those familial bonds? And I'll explain what I mean by that in a little bit. When the state imposes restrictions on how parents can treat their children, and here I mean in the broadest terms, we're talking corporal punishment, we're talking education, and at, I think, the extreme end, we're talking abortion, because abortion is an extreme act. I would say it is always a bad act. It is always a terrible act. It's just that sometimes, in some circumstances, it isn't the worst possible act. So anyways, when the state imposes restrictions on how parents can treat their children, it inserts the state between the parent and the child. It intercedes and imposes itself in that relationship between the two parties. Now, this is sort of justified by the idea that this is necessary in some families. Some parents are just so abusive and terrible and neglectful and just horrible to their children, that this state intercession is absolutely necessary. And that might actually be true. However, the possibility of that interception, the intercession of the state, robs all families of a degree of intimacy that they would have if it was just those two. And here it's critical to say the knowledge alone is the imposition. The CPS doesn't actually have to get involved to do that. Just the knowledge that option is on the table is itself a very small imposition. And it reminds me of a very old Russell Peters comedy sketch back in the early days of YouTube. Russell Peters is an Indian comedian, and here him being Indian is important because he's talking about his interaction with Canadian whites and the different parenting styles between the Asians and the Indians and the whites, where his dad would beat him if he misbehaved or if he talked back or didn't do well on his schoolwork and so forth. And he went and spent time at a friend's house who was just horrible to his parents. This white kid, he talked back to his parents. He said, "Fuck you, Mom. I don't have to do what you say." All this, and his impression of the white mother was like, "What am I gonna do with him?" And after talking with his friend for a while, he realized he didn't have to do what his parents said either. He could just tell them no, and if they threatened him, he could threaten to call CPS on them or child aid or whatever it was. To which his Indian father said, "Here's the phone. Give them a call. I know it will take 23 minutes for them to get to you, and in the meantime, somebody's going to get a real hurting." Or I'm doing a terrible Indian accent, but calling the bluff and stuff. But the knowledge of CPS or child aid or whatever it was, it's like an elephant in the room in the relationship between the parent and the child. It's this unacknowledged entity that exists as we'd like to think of them as a safety net, but it is, in being a safety net, also a kind of a third party. You've got someone else there in the room with you. And my wife has grown very fond of saying, you can't play test commitment in the context of marriage. And I think it's true. I think it is true. And if you don't commit all the way, you'll often self-sabotage. And when it comes to parenting a child, I don't know if self-sabotage is exactly the right term, but it chills the relationship by degrees. That it dilutes it in a way. And the negation of ownership of children, because let's be frank, that is what we're talking about, or maybe stewardship is a better word, but functionally speaking, ownership in terms of who's responsible for this child. When we look at this question from an anthropological lens, the negation of the ownership of children that we have tacitly with this imposition of the state can have some very serious long-term social and political effects. It is very often said that matriarchies don't exist in human history. When they do, they're very short-lived, or they can only exist in contexts of extreme isolation. Because what happens in matriarchies is that the fathers, who don't know who their own offspring are, lose that personal investment in the tribe that would cause them to put their own lives at risk in defense of that tribe when it comes under attack, or if it comes under some kind of threat. So you lose the parental investment by degrees, by probabilistic margins, but it's the effect adds up in a cumulative effect that is quite serious and caused patriarchies to outcompete matriarchies every single time when they were in conflict in the past. And I think with the state interceding in families, you will get a situation where either the family goes along with the state, or the state wins over the family every single time. And very tragically, there have been a number of cases like that in the news recently, especially as far as, well, I won't get into it. Anyways, so getting back to it, it chills the relationship too, and this is something that is felt less with the subject of abortion, obviously, because how can you chill a relationship with the unborn dead? But as far as the sovereignty is concerned, we do experience it with governmental intercession in things like public schools. That separates the child from the parent. Again, always by degree. And we can actually see this also outside of parent-child relationships, arguably, with the introduction of no-fault divorce. I think there's probably a big connection. People like to talk about birth control. People like to talk about women voting, female suffrage, and other things. But, and a lot of different factors have probably gone into the rise in divorce rates today. But no-fault divorce is a big one, I think. The option is always there, and the state is always there. Sort of only partially joking. It's one of the reasons my wife and I have a murder before divorce policy. So if something happens to me, you'll know why. So anyways, the right-wing case for abortion, which is really the legalization of abortion, not like you should have an abortion. Obviously, as stated before, abortion is always horrible, always terrible, almost always the wrong choice, but maybe sometimes, as horrible as it is, perhaps not the worst choice. The right-wing case for abortion is the case for absolute sovereignty in parental stewardship over their own children. And this is really important because it preserves the family by preserving that sovereignty of the parents and protecting against the imposition of the state, which severs the bonds, the intimacy of the bonds between parents and child. And, protecting the child from parents as if parents were a tacit threat, which is what the creation of institutions designed to do that for, is corrosive to that bond. I think it introduces the idea that parents are a threat, and it also much more perniciously sort of preempts the idea that the state might be a threat to children. which is an often forgotten thing. Everyone was in quite a tizzy over, the Catholic Church, rape scandal, which was serious. There were lots of Catholic priests raping and molesting young boys. But what people forget is the only reason the Catholic Church was gone after so hard over that is that the Catholic Church claims to be, morally perfect and the spokesman for God on earth and so forth. So they hold themselves to a slightly higher standard. But when we look at the Catholic Church outside of the Christian theological framework and look at it more statistically, the Catholic Church is not any more abusive to children than American public schools. Tens of thousands of children are raped, abused, and bullied at government schools every year, many of which result in suicides. And when we talk about government abuse of children and of families and of the destruction of families, we would be woefully negligent to forget what might be the worst of all the government organizations. No, it is not the CIA. No, it is not the FBI. No, it's not the IRS. The worst of all the government organizations is probably the Child Protection Services. CPS is, I had a high school friend of mine who worked with them for a little while. He couldn't go into details about it, but he said it was absolutely awful. They didn't protect the children who actually needed protection. They would take away children who didn't need to be taken away, or would weaponize the threat of it in order to extract, compliance in other domains from parents. It was just insanely corrupt and destructive to children and to families, and is, of course, one of the more easy governmental agencies to weaponize against other people. And of course, needless to say, the foster parents that foster children often get sent to are often infinitely more abusive than even their perhaps abusive biological parents, because foster parents, aside from not having that blood bond that ties parents to their own children, the role of a foster parent attracts the sort of people who perhaps have an undue interest in children, if you catch my drift. So, as bad as parents can be, and it has to be admitted, we're not faced with a choice between good and bad here. We're faced between a set of trade-offs. There are bad parents, but the state is also horrible. And what we're after here is the preservation of the bonds of the family as best as we can. And the state is looking more at the individual. So they're saying, how can we protect the child? And parents can be a threat to the child, so we'll protect the child. The familial institution model, which is the right-wing position, as opposed to the left-wing civil rights position, is that actually what's best for the child is almost always going to be a strong family. And unfortunately, that's not the sort of thing that the government can guarantee. But it is the sort of thing that the government can, at least via negativa, protect by not interfering and not actively destroying it when it's working well. And there's actually very good, empirical evidence for the importance of the family in the healthy development and success and happiness of children as they become adults. Which you're free to, research on your own if you're interested. So, care for the family requires preserving the bonds that unify the family and the integrity of those bonds. And that has to begin with sovereignty. And, as strange as this may sound, preserving that sovereignty, has to be it has to be absolute if it's going to be real sovereignty. And I think for it to be absolute, it has to include even abortion, even the right to kill your own child. Now, I feel extremely queasy about granting that right past birth. Leftists talk about post-birth abortion. However, it is worth mentioning from an objective philosophical perspective that there is some history here. First of all, when we talk about natural rights instead of civil rights, we see filicide in nature. If you follow like an Instagram page like Nature is Metal, or any number of these other like rough nature channels that exist on social media variously, you'll see cases of birds that will occasionally chuck an offspring out of their nest because they don't have enough food to care for all of them. So we'll take 2 healthy chicks over 3 starving chicks that probably won't make it in the brutality of the natural world. It's rough. It's not fun to watch, but I think it is a healthy dose of sanity and perspective that people who live behind desks and in climate-controlled houses can often forget sometimes. In human history, we see some precedent with this in ancient Greece and Rome, where fathers were permitted to execute their children if they deemed it fit, with no legal repercussions. They had absolute sovereignty over their children, even up into their early teens. And again, I feel very queasy going that far. I don't think we need to necessarily go that far. I think it does make sense to talk about individual rights at a certain point, but I don't think abortion is asking that much within this context of familial sovereignty. Now, it might make sense to ask, well, you talk about familial sovereignty, what about abortions outside the families? What about mothers killing unborn children against the father's wishes? And that is a serious question. And perhaps we'll need some legal nuance there. Perhaps only abortions, perhaps we only permit abortions where both parents consent. But I mean, maybe that could also cause problems, because I mean, like maybe like the father isn't married to the wife, or to the woman rather, and he just wants an offspring, but he doesn't want to like invest in it. So maybe both parents' consent is required if they are married. But this is the sort of thing that lawyers could debate about. But the important thing is to bring in the sovereignty frame, because so much more is at stake here than these important but statistically very small strange cases that are get us into the weeds on details. Now another question might be coming from strong Catholic and Mormon communities that say like, look, we've got strong families, we're doing the thing you're talking about, and we don't need abortion to preserve our families. We don't need the right to have abortions. We can do exactly what you're talking about without that. And they're right. They are the model to follow. Mormons are killing it. Culturally, religiously, they are excellent models for other subcultures to emulate in many ways. However, I think that's a short-term, it's a very short-sighted response. We don't need abortion to preserve our families. Perhaps not, but what will you say when the government uses the authority you have tacitly granted to them and uses that to demand that your children also learn about evolution and be exposed to other religions and perhaps to drag queen story hour? And if you don't do that, you're an abusive or negligent parent who perhaps should lose parenting rights. What are you going to do with that? I think even religious parents want to retain sovereignty over these matters because they understand the importance of family in raising the children well according to their own values and beliefs. The Mormons are doing so well culturally, familially. They are the model to follow with family, precisely because they have this strong knit, family bond that has largely kept the state out. But that's not that's not guaranteed in the future, and indeed we're already beginning to see impositions into that. The Mormon Church, at least the main line, the LDS Church, has been forced to make a number of cultural concessions over the last 40 or 50 years, much as the Catholic Church has been forced to, and that will likely continue down the road. And I mean, more to the point, even a religious parent, if they believe in the immortality of the soul, might prefer their children to die young but be saved than to be corrupted by the sin of the world. That's at least a question they have to grapple with. And this goes all the way back to Augustine, who talked about, what if the martyrs who were killed early, and he says, why should we care about those who are destined to die anyways, dying a little bit sooner, so long as they maintain their, place in heaven and their relationship with God? So familial sovereignty, insofar as it relates to the soul of the child, or as we non-Christians might say, the character, though we can talk about the soul as well, is extremely significant. And that has a lot to do, psychologically, with their bonds to their parents during development. And so a chilling of that bond, a partial severing of that bond, can be extremely damaging in ways that are not nearly as visible, even if they are just as extensive, at least when we compare the numbers, as something as terrible as abortion. And it's worth pointing out as well, and I think I'll kind of close on this point. The religious people who, and here I mean Christians, who want to protect the innocent, who want to protect the unborn, as noble as a drive as that is, when they try to illegalize abortion, what they are doing is imposing themselves on other parents and the parenting decisions of other parents who don't think the way that they do. Now, we are perfectly entitled to say, I think they're awful parents. I think it's horrible that a parent would even contemplate killing their own unborn child. Perhaps we could forgive a parent who commits filicide on their 12-year-old who did something horrible. But, what has an unborn done? It's totally understandable to want to protect the innocent. But when you try to criminalize it, when you try to illegalize it, you are imposing yourselves on other parents and their sovereignty as parents. It's similar to the kind of weaponization of the phrase child abuse that we heard from new atheists like Richard Dawkins. We talked about religious indoctrination as child abuse. That pendulum can swing right back around. And it is neither your duty nor your obligation nor your place to save to intercede on other people's sovereignty to protect the innocent, to save other people. You can't save the whole nation even if you wanted to, and it isn't your place to try. And it is worth reiterating. It's worth saying that most of the worst harms that have been that have come to the United States in the past decade or two, probably in the past 300 years, honestly, have been brought about by those with good intentions, those who truly did want the best for other people. But because they were going so far outside their own sphere, or just because they were human, they were bringing limited knowledge and interceding where they did not have real understanding. And I think by asserting parental sovereignty in extreme cases, even in extreme cases like abortion, we can limit that those harmful good intentions by limiting the intercessions, the impositions between parents and children that are, now understood empirically, but also have long been understood institutionally to be the most important thing for the development of the child and, in aggregate, for the promotion of a just and prosperous nation, because just and prosperous nations are built on strong families. I hate to sound like a frickin' PragerU talking point conservative, but on this particular point, they happen to be correct. So, I think we can protect the institution that is the most important and crucial institution for the development, success, and happiness of the next generation, which is the family and not the state. But we can only do that if we assert and defend the sovereignty of parents in the family, even in extreme circumstances. And that, I think, requires the legal permissibility of abortion. I don't see another way around it. Christians will, of course, likely disagree with this because, as I said at the beginning, for them it's not about politics, it's about a moral internal virtue of not doing wrong, not sinning. And to permit the harm of an innocent or to stand by without standing up against it, would be a sin. It would hurt their conscience. And that's fair enough. I can understand where they're coming from at that theological level. But for any conservatives of the, more of the less religious kind, who find themselves torn, like not agreeing with the religious right, but also terrified of the in a different way religious left, as I sort of find myself to be, there is a strong position here that is thankfully also not politically suicidal, but is also in a more utilitarian sense likely to be even more beneficial to families and to the future than the traditional right-wing view on abortion and familial sovereignty. And I think I'll close it there. Hope this was thought-provoking. If you disagree with me, you are probably in very good company. But if it gets things, gets some gears turning, I'll have done my job. So thanks for listening. Talk to you all later.